So we're meeting today not simply to oppose the Australian Education Union's attempt to push through a pro-government agreement on teachers and education support staff in Victoria. We're trying to develop a conscious movement against the far broader offensive being waged on the working class as a whole. The same Labor governments, state and federal, that are demanding wage restraint, larger class sizes, deeper austerity in our schools, are simultaneously backing the US-led war against Iran and preparing for future conflicts. So a fight for educators' conditions must become a struggle against the ruling elite and both the state and federal governments that are diverting society's resources into militarism, enforcing austerity at home, and relying on the union apparatus to suppress resistance and impose this agenda. The terrible situation in public education is not an accident, it's a crisis by design. Successive Labor and Liberal national governments have produced overcrowded classrooms, decaying infrastructure, and thousands of vacancies or positions that aren't being filled. Applications per teaching position collapsed from 10.6 in 2020 to 2.8 in 2022. In Australian schools, where more than 30% of students come from socio-economically struggling homes, 67% of principals report severe teacher shortages hindering education. Now, so there's a direct link in positions that need to be filled and socio-economic status. This is the second worst rate in the entire OECD and more than double the international average of 31.7%. Victorian teachers routinely work 60 hours per week. 76% of those are planning to leave and expect to do so within 4 years, driven out by the workloads and the general conditions that exist. Education support staff face similar pressures, and also the fact that they're vastly underpaid and working on wages that cannot sustain, an individual or a household. It's impossible to understand the current dispute where the Australian Education Union is attempting to impose a retrograde agreement onto teachers and ES staff without situating it in its global context. The same dynamics shaping the US-Israeli war on Iran, the assault on social programs in the US, and the austerity measures provoking mass strikes across Europe and Latin America are at work here. The subordination of workers' needs it's the subordination of workers' needs to the strategic imperatives of the ruling elite. With the US-Israeli war against Iran now past its 100th day, this was a calculated political crime, illegal, completely unconstitutional, and launched against a country that neither attacked the US or posed any military threat. After months of bombardment, Washington has not toppled the Iranian government, shattered its military, or secured the Strait of Hormuz. These are all the goals that they held, and it shows this is not a defence not defensive whatsoever, but a trajectory that has discarded all legal restraints. Political discourse has shifted into openly fascistic territory. Trump threatens to extinguish a whole civilization, and this is unprecedented. The consequences of this are global, and they impact directly on, workers right throughout the world, including here. The blockade of the Strait of Hormuz has destabilised shipping, torn apart supply chains. The World Food Programme warns the war could push 45 million people into acute hunger, hitting import-dependent nations across Africa and Asia. And the thing is, even if there's an immediate ceasefire, the processes that are underway will continue. It's not, there will be a whole follow-on of what's occurred. If you look at the first half of this decade, it was defined by escalating imperialist conflict, whether it was Gaza, Ukraine, and now Iran. The second half is witnessing a resurgence of struggle by the working class. And while the ruling class is accelerating towards war and economic crisis, workers are entering into struggle. So I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of that. Italy has really been at the forefront. General strikes have brought the country to a standstill. Millions opposing the Maloney government's war budget and its complicity in Gaza. And in May alone, a 24-hour general strike paralysed the country, as well as another on May 29th in Bolivia. An indefinite national strike against fuel price hikes has been underway for 6 weeks. In the US, the auto parts sector exemplifies this upsurge. At next tier, automotive's Saginaw, workers rejected 4 consecutive UAW back contracts. So the unions put forward 4 contracts. The workers have rejected them every time. And the company can be confident that the union is just going to rewrite it without changing any of the real content. American Axle, a 98% strike authorisation vote triggered a June 1st walkout, and in both cases, the union bureaucracy has functioned as management's instrument, intimidating workers, supervising votes, and pushing for further concessions from workers, not from the company. The next tier workers rank and file committee has called for a united industry-wide struggle, the way forward being independent, democratically controlled rank and file committees that break from union apparatuses that are suppressing the struggle of workers. Now, one important point, and it's the same in Australia, is that war abroad always means social attacks at home. Trump exemplified this, saying, "We're fighting wars, we can't take care of daycare. You've got to let the state take care of daycare and they should pay for it too." And obviously, he's not going to provide funding for that. So we're seeing the elimination of very basic, necessary social aspects of life by governments in order to fund war. This agenda of dismantling social programs at home, is being carried out by governments everywhere, including here. Meanwhile, here, the Albanese government intensifies militarism and austerity. It has committed an additional $53 billion to military spending over the next decade and was amongst the earliest supporters of the US war in Iran. The May 12 budget imposed a 63.8 billion in social spending cuts over 4 years, with an unprecedented attack on the NDIS, an attack which is on the most vulnerable in society. This will have a profound impact in the schools. Not only will it mean that so many students who need help won't get it, but it will have dramatic impact on classrooms. And education support staff would be well aware of that there are so many students that don't get funding that need it. And this is going to now multiply. This occurs even as, military expenditures reach an all-time high of 63.2 billion for the last cycle of spending, that is 2025, 2026. One disability protester put it that we interviewed, there's clearly money for the military and for war, but there's never enough money for people and their basic needs. So governments will claim, and they do claim the fiscal impossibility of funding education properly. And if you've attended any of the regional meetings, you would have heard that there's not enough, we can't fund all the positions, they can't be funded, and therefore the union can't fight for lower class sizes and less teaching time. The same logic governs public health. Decades of cutbacks there as well. It's produced a semi-privatised system. Profitable care is siphoned off to private operators that make literally billions of dollars, while the public sector absorbs the complex, unprofitable remainder. And, you've seen in the media and everywhere else, ambulance delays are lethal, psychiatric wards close, governments respond not by funding services, but by accelerating privatisation. Nurses face ever increasing patient ratios as infrastructure just is allowed to deteriorate. So one can imagine that if the $50 billion that was just recently injected into the military wasn't injected into the military, but was injected into public education, and I'm doing this because it shows you the priorities of society. But if you did do that, total state and federal funding at the moment stands at 68.3 billion. That's just for that's state governments, federal governments funding towards state education. A $50 billion injection, which represents a 73% increase, would be transformative. Aging portables would be replaced with climate resilient facilities, modern science labs, art complexes, and regional distance education hubs built. Every student would be equipped with fully funded devices of the most modern type. Teacher salaries would be lifted to levels that are competitive or comparable with, in all the in other sectors, ending the shortage, reduce class sizes, universal literacy and numeracy support, and full-time psychologists, speech pathologists, and occupational therapists in every school would follow. Now, for those that aren't involved in education who have attended the meeting, things like breakfast clubs, excursions, and elective materials, things where you take students into the city and see the elderly or, these things that make such a difference. These would not just be on the periphery, they would become part of the actual centre of education. So this is not some sort of utopia I'm trying to create, but a demonstration that the social reality we live in, and I hope some of the ES staff and teachers from the schools, particularly in the working class areas, will give us an idea of the situation they confront. That these are the situation there is due to the political priorities, which are for profit. The crises that we see result from a redirection of public spending from social need to war, and to enrich the ruling elite. The union bureaucracies enforce this agenda, suppressing struggles and binding workers to labour. Teachers, nurses, and education support staff in all these areas confront the same enemy and require the same solution: independent rank and file committees fighting for fully funded public education and healthcare, financed by expropriating the corporate and financial elite. But what we see at the current point is that union bureaucracies, such as the AEU, cannot be pressured or reformed. And this is a critical issue. This is in direct contrast to tendencies such as socialists in schools or Fight the Crisis, who promote this fiction that if we all vote no and carry out more strikes, there'll be concessions made and that, we can go on as normal. In fact, the AEU functions as an instrument of government, and the way, and so we have to reject any sort of idea that they can be pressured and that that teachers and education support staff can gain something just via voting no and leaving it at that. Rank and file committees must link across schools, industry, and national borders through the International Workers Alliance of rank and file committees. The fight for wages that keep pace with inflation, for capped class sizes, for fully funded disability support, and against the destruction of the NDIS is inseparable from the fight against war and the fight against austerity. And they are inseparable from building a socialist political movement of the working class against the capitalist system that generates these attacks.